design before anybody else? And I think that the answer of that is mostly because they started by partnering with nature. And so now when I go in and teach these PhDs about sustainable regenerative design, I start out by pointing out that natural ecosystems are our only existing model thermodynamically of sustainable and regenerative design. And so we start from there, and I go back and like start from of course, for them,
anything holding you back? Yeah, Jack needs to set better goals, but sometimes we run into things that it don't go so well, like
for homesteaders and for small farms and so forth. And I realized that my niche was in teaching scientists, engineers, agroecology professionals, and that got me pulled into ecosystem regeneration. So I also do a bunch of stuff now with bioremediation. I've been involved in bioremediation in a lot of places. I've been helping with the bioremediation of the Lahaina fires in Maui. I got pulled into helping with some of the bioremediational work in North Carolina after Helene. So I do that kind of work as well. So that's kind of my thing. And because of what I'm doing and having to scale up and work with professionals, I had to retool a lot of the tools of permaculture. And the reason was they were developed and perfected usually with one designer, not a whole team, right? And they were working on something like a homestead scale or a small farm scale. So now all of a sudden I'm brought in as a consultant to design a development for 30,000 people to live in. And so, it doesn't work the same way. And so I had to redesign some of the tools. And so I got to thinking about what would be high value here that might be very helpful for you to pull out of what I normally do. And that some of you may not have seen before, because I know some of you have seen some of the online classes and so forth I've done. So this one is where I thought we'd start. And so who out here is familiar with PA Yeomans and the Yeoman scale of permanence? Okay, well, I actually got to pull it out of the bag here. I do remember bringing it. There it is. Anybody recognize this?
Yes. Yeah.
That's the first edition. Managed to find a copy of it. This is P.A. Yeoman's Water for Every Farm. P.A. Yeoman's was an Australian farmer, and he came up with a lot of really cool things. Keyline design is really comes down from P.A. Yeoman's, for those of you who are familiar with keyline design. But the scale of permanence was another one. And so the first thing I figured out when I started looking at it was that a lot of people, when they start looking at any kind of land design, land use patterning, they're like, where do I start? What do I do? Where do I get a handle on this, right? Because there's so much stuff. And so when I do the professional design classes where we bring people in and we're going to have everybody do a professional design, in a PDC format, but my expectations are higher than just about anybody else's. I was like, how are we going to frame this? And so we actually frame it, because I'll have like professional architects and engineers and everybody else come into the classes. I frame it with Yeoman scale. The problem is that what did Yeoman's do? Yeoman's scale of permanence is he designed it to be applicable to what? A farm, and a farm of a certain size and scale too, right? Okay, so I was like, well, that's great, but sometimes I got to deal with like 30 square miles, right? And so when I do the professional version of this class, I'm going to give you a sneak peek, and I'm going to leave this up here so you can see it. This is my version of Yeoman's scale of permanence, okay? And we're going to look at it in a minute, but this actually adds a lot of other stuff in there, like technological infrastructure and human structures and so forth, and it does it at all kinds of scales, all the way up to planetary scale, okay? So we're going to look at that, and so I'm going to leave this up here. You'll be able to come by and take a look at it for the rest of the weekend if you'd like to dig into it and so forth. But I also had to modify Yeoman's scale of permanence just a little bit. And so for those of you who've never seen it before, this is what P.A. Yeoman said. He was like, okay, well, how do I get a handle on when I just go out and I got a big piece of land and I'm going to start? How do I start structuring? He said, well, there are certain elements in your landscape that are hard to change, and they also tend to stay that way for a long time, right? So on this axis right here, no, he doesn't want to go. There we go. Okay, on this axis, we have the difficulty of change. The higher up this way you go, the more difficult it is to make a change in it. And then over this, in the x-axis, the further that way we go, the more permanent it is. And so P.A. Yeoman said, well, what is like the most difficult to change and the most long-term thing when you walk outside and looking at a piece of land? He said, well, the first thing is climate. The climate zone you're in, right? And by the way, he's not completely right. We can change that. Okay, that's one of the things I had to change, because we can actually change our climate. Okay, on a site basis and on a watershed scale, we can change our climate. Okay, so that's one of the places I had to fix Yeoman's, right? Because it turns out that topography is actually harder to change at scale than climate is. Okay, so I had to swap those in my version. Okay, but the next thing he said was he called it landform. Okay, which is the broad shape of the land. Now, yep, we can make changes in small, features on the landscape, but you're like, there's a mountain, and there's a valley, and there's a river. Can we change that? Yeah, we can. Give us enough. But we can do it. We can do it. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. We can do it. It's highly destructive and takes a huge amount of energy and so forth. And the big thing about doing this is, why is it where it was in the first place? Why is it there? Because the flows of natural forces put it there, and almost always when you make changes, it tries to go back as soon as you're done, right? So what we do as designers is we articulate existing patterns instead of try to impose entirely new patterns on the landform. Good designers work with the flows of the forces so that their articulations are actually reinforced when they walk away. Bad designers go, well, I don't like that. And I see this all the time when I'm working with landscape architects who decide that they're going to do an entire, say, I've seen mixed use walkable developments that are like 600 acres. And what they want to do is come in and just plow everything down, and they want to bring in just dozens of pieces of heavy equipment and reform the landscape. As soon as they get done, guess what happens? It starts to just fall apart. And they're like, why is it not behaving? Well, it's because it's misbehaving because you ignored the flows, the forces of nature that put it where it was in the first place.
We can show you an example of that right over here.
Yeah, we see it all over the place. So one of the big things I have to do with civil engineers is go like, whack, and landscape architects too. Stop that, right? Just because you've got a whole fleet of 30-ton excavators doesn't mean you should use them that way. Okay, I give your design an F. That gets their attention usually because they had to, yeah. Yes, okay. So Yeoman said that those two things, the broad landform and the climate, were givens, and we needed to go look at those things and figure them out and then work with what we got. And so I would say broad landform, yep. Use what you've got, articulate it, don't try to overpower it. Climate, if you don't like it, we can change it. That's kind of interesting, right? And actually who's familiar with Rajendra Singh's work? The Waterman of India.
Oh, yes.
Yes. Okay. So he went in and started to actually, there was all these villages throughout India where what was happening was the landscape had been desertifying for a long time because of misuse, overgrazing with certain animals, so on and so forth. And they had stopped using certain of their traditional indigenous methods of water management. And so he learned from some of the elders how to do these traditional water harvesting techniques and started to recharge the groundwater. Well, go look up what he did. Andrew Millison has some great videos where he went over and showed all this, but I'll give you this. There are now several rivers, not just creeks, but rivers that they have restored to flow that were dry. Okay, they have regreened the entire landscape, and that entire region is now 2 degrees Celsius cooler on average than it was before. So can we change climate? Yes, we can. Okay. So we'll just say that and I don't have time to get into all like the professional version of this we do. We get into what I call hydroclimate, which is like how I do hydrological interventions at watershed scale to be able to restore the large and small hydrological cycles. And when we do that, we can stabilize the climate in an area. And then we use what I call bioclimate, which is the biology on your site, because the biology on your site can actually impact the weather on your site, okay? And thereby help change around the climate a little bit, okay? So, all right, those are the top two. Well, where's the first place that we will generally intervene? What do you think? Water and hydrology, okay? So, what you'll notice is that, hard to change on a large scale, but sometimes really dang worth it. And so, what we'll always do as professional designers, which you're all going to now be professional designers, right? Okay, is you have a piece of land you're working on. I don't care what the size is. I don't care if it's a quarter-acre site. I don't care if it's something I'm working on that's like 30 square miles. I always start in the same place. I always start by gathering the climate data. And we'll show you how to do that, okay? The next thing I do is we get the proper topographic maps we need in order to be able to see the thing. And what I'll tell you is that the topographic map is A, critical, and B, it is no substitute for walking the land. Okay? Because there's this debate. Well, can I design from a topo map, or do I need to just be on and not have a topo map and just be on the ground? And the answer is, for me, I always insist on both. Always. I don't care what the scale is, because A, there are things I can see with my eye that no topo map will show me. Conversely, your eye will lie to you about certain things on the landscape. It's hard to see subtle variations and so forth. And unless you just live there and are able to go out every time it rains and look really carefully so you can tell, so the water can tell you the tale, okay, then you need the topo maps. So I'm always insisting on both. So what we need to do is, wherever you are, whatever scale you're working at, we need to start with the climate data, we need to start with the topo data, okay? Now we're down to hydrology. That's where our first design interventions typically hit. Because, again, we'll now go to Sepp Holzer, who likes to say that, you know, when you get water right, your job is 70% done, because life is 70% water. Okay, it's a little bit of a conceit, but I get where he's going, right? Here's the thing. If you get water right in your design, everything else is easier. If the water is wrong, what do you think? You're fighting forever, right? It's a type 1 error. You're fighting with it forever, right? So generally, when you see me going in, and it's really fun. Like, I'll go in, I'll have landscape, I'll have a job where I'm the top level consultant, right? And I've got architects and landscape architects and civil engineers working underneath what I'm doing, right? Which at first they're really confused by that, right? What happens, of course, is that the architect comes in, and guess what they want to do first? The buildings and structures. Where does my building go? Right? That's the first thing, right? I'm like, stop it.
We don't know yet.
We don't know yet. We can't know yet, because we got to get all of this right first. If we get all of this stuff right, then where the building should go emerges. It becomes obvious, right? But what happens in most professional design these days is the architect is the top dog on a large-scale project. They come in and go, I shall put my building here. Notice the my building, right? It is my building. My artistic vision is that the building shall go here. And then the landscape architect is scrambling around trying to figure out how to, like, make the landscape fit around the building, right? And so normally what happens is they come in, they just like whack the whole thing down, and then they build the buildings, and then they try to back propagate. It's always a mess, okay? So when we're bringing in architects and training them, we're like, nope, you can't get there yet because we haven't done it. Always start with your water and hydrology. Do you need ponds? Do you need to re-meander streams? What do you need to do? And this is one of those places where if you need help, professional help, it's actually worth it. This is the #1 place. Getting the hydrology right on your landscape is probably the best place if you need design help, to spend a little money to bring in somebody who really knows what they're doing. Because again, if you get the water right, you're probably Everything else downstream is much easier. Okay. So then below that, this is one of the places I did change. You've seen this is slightly updated and modified. Long-term forestry. I put long-term forestry in when I teach yeoman scale here because what's the purpose of long-term forestry?
Long-term stability and nutrient cycles.
Yes, exactly. It goes with our hydrology and it does things like make certain that we are not creating highly erosive areas, right? And that we can put in things like really critical wind blocks and other things of that nature. And if we do it right, we can also set it up so that that's a long-term source in a lot of climates. We can make that a long-term source of building materials because it can be thinned over time, right? So I always go there before I go into roads and access. I want to know where my stability points are and where I'm going to have like, okay, I'm protecting that ridge line or I'm protecting that sloped area and so forth, right? Then I'll go to roads and access. How are we going to get around the area? And again, this can be anything from like if you're in a half area, like a quarter acre suburban site, it's where do my footpaths go, right? How do I get my equipment, which might be a wheelbarrow, around the site? If we are on a 30 square mile site, I'm looking at where do the major roadways go and how do the roads sit in here so that they actually do things, including for me, I'm looking at how do we make certain that we don't like do habitat segmentation and fragmentation so that we have wildland habitat continuity. And if I have to put a road through a certain place, I'm actually building underpasses for the wildlife. Because if we don't, then we actually take and drastically reduce the biodiversity surrounding what we're doing. And therefore, we damage the ability, the carrying capacity of the wildlands around us to support what we're up to. So we hurt ourselves, right? Number two, of course, is we increase the possibility of human car and wildlife interactions, right? So we're making it safer at the same time, right? So now we get to roads and access. Then finally we get to buildings and structures because now we have the hydrology correct. We know where our backbone forests are. We know where our roads and access are. If we do our job right at this point in time, now the places for your buildings and your structures emerges, right? So now we're patterning them in. Then after that, we can get into permanent fencing, and then we can get into short-term forestry. What would be a good example of short-term forestry? An orchard or a food forest or a permaculture orchard or whatever you want to call it, right? Because what's the lifespan of a lot of those tree species? So if you are doing dwarf stock or semi-dwarfing stock, you're probably you're like in a, well, if super dwarf, you're in 12 to 15. If you're doing standard trees, you might be up to 40. Okay, so it really depends upon your stock, your root stock. Okay, but we call that short term. So that's a fast rotating forest system, like your perennial production system, right? That can get patterned in because that can actually move around over time. One of the things I teach is what we call a shifting mosaic, because in the temperate landscape, that's what it was. You realize where we're standing right now that this was not enclosed eastern deciduous forest. It was actually a mosaic of closed canopy eastern deciduous forest and a savanna-like ecosystem. There was a savanna-like ecosystem. What was the large ruminant right here? It was bison. Right where we are, it was bison. There was a there was a subspecies of bison that was more heat adapted down here. There's some of them actually over in Texas. There's some herds over in Texas, and we've brought some back over in this area for some indigenous people in locations that we won't disclose, right? That brought those back because until they were removed from this landscape in the 1830s, they had a relationship with the bison in the landscape around them. Okay, so what was super productive up until it was stopped in the 1830s in the southeastern United States was this mosaic of closed canopy eastern deciduous forest with meadow ecosystems and savanna-like ecosystems, which was, say, 20 to 25% canopy with large ruminants underneath them. And then what was the top predator for the bison? Yep, which kind of wolf?
How far back?
Red wolf. Yeah, the red wolf in this area was the subspecies of wolf that was actually the top predator and caused that rotational graze to happen, right? So when we're looking at it, what we're always trying to do is figure out how we can have a shifting mosaic over time. And so I'm looking at things like, I want to go back and figure out we're going to get to reference ecologies in a minute, talk about reference ecologies and why we look at them. Because what it tells me is what wants to grow here, right? Because when we're picking out the production systems for any location, what I want to know is what wants to grow here, right? When I'm looking at water, I go walking across the landscape and go, where does the pond want to be, right? And I put the pond there. When I'm looking at a production system, I'm like, what wants to grow here? And I'm going to look at that. If we used to have a savanna-like ecosystem, I'm like, well, let's pattern off of that. And you can use smaller ruminants like sheep, okay? Or you can use bison if you are a little more daring. Yeah.
Also requires good fences.
Yeah, incredible fences. Yeah.
There was a bison farm.
Yeah.
Strands maybe will work for bison.
We did an we did an 8-strand system. Height makes a difference.
Yep.
Yes, we did an 8-strand system, and yeah, the Energizer would have killed an elephant. Right. Yeah. And then of course we put a nice little sign on the outside that says, "Please do not pet the fluffy cows." Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
I know. Or
Yeah.
go ahead, right?
Right. Yeah. All right. And we get all the way down here. We get to annual crops and gardens, because if we know what we're doing, we can actually move those things around if we have to, right? We can actually take and go from dead standing in dirt to a fairly productive garden in 3 years if we know how to fast cycle things, okay? So up here in water and hydrology, if we fix that right, that's a 1,000-year solution, right? Okay, maybe a little maintenance with some hand tools after it's originally done, but if you do it right, it's a 1,000-year solution, right? Okay, down here, so this is a framework for you to think about, where do I start and how do I create the broad framework for any design I'm doing at any scale, right? And then work my way down. So the rule of thumb is start up here and work your way down in terms of it. Now, that's what we do as the first design project for people. Then, of course, the next thing I says is, okay, this is like jazz, in that once you get good at this, you're looking at this, but you have this in mind, right? It's like you're kind of working your way down, right? But in the back of your head, you're like going, ooh, if I make this, I have a couple of options, and if I take this choice up here, then it'll give me a lot more downstream options, right? And so that's where you get once you're a little more experienced. That's one of the advantages of a really experienced designer, is that they can look at a thing and go, ooh, between the options I've got, this is the one I want, because it's going to give me all these other options downstream, okay? But for your first design, you just, work your way down, and then you'll start learning it pretty fast. Okay, so when I started looking at this, I'm gonna go through this part really fast so we can get a little more practical, right? When I started looking at this, I was like, I have to design all these different levels of scale. Sometimes the biggest things I'm working on are multi-watersheds. I'm talking about like major watersheds, right? So it's not just one watershed level. It's like, hey, we're looking at, like a whole basin area or something. So I said, well, okay, we have different levels of scale all stacked inside of each other. And the first thing as a designer I have to think about is I'm designing inside of the cosmos, right? Anybody here have a design project outside of the current universe? Okay. Well, as far as we understand, the laws of physics are the same. And so what that means as a designer, the first thing I have to have is some understanding of the laws of physics. And from that derive things like the laws of chemistry, the laws of biology, and so on and so forth, right? And so that is the first thing I have to have, I know something about as a professional designer. But we stack inside of that the fact that we are, until Elon gets us on Mars, we are designing also inside of Gaia, right? That is inside of the biosphere of planet Earth. And biology and ecology are the rules that govern the life cycles inside of Earth. If you are going to be a really good professional designer, you need to study ecology. Okay? And I don't care what you're designing. So I don't care if you're a mechanical engineer, you're going to be a better mechanical engineer if you've studied ecology. It's really interesting because we'll go off and, what the framework I'm teaching is integrated regenerative design. Okay, I used to go in and have professors at universities say, we would love for you to come and teach your professional permaculture course at Georgia Tech or wherever, right? And we would show up to start having that discussion. And as soon as you said permaculture, they looked it up and it was like, we don't garden, right? Because the engineers and architects are like, we don't grow gardens, right? So they would immediately shut you down. And so, but I came back and said, well, we have the integrated regenerative design framework. Here it all is, blah, 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 blah. Like, oh, this is brilliant. Yay, right? Okay. Then you get them in the door to start teaching them integrated regenerative design. And then you say, oh, by the way, the only model we have of sustainable and regenerative design is life. And therefore, in order to teach you to do sustainable regenerative design, you have to learn how to grow a garden. Right? Right. Okay. Right?
You want to be smart to grow a garden.
Grow a garden, right? So that's the next thing. Okay. No matter where you are designing on the planet, the laws of biology and ecology, they're governing. So you need that. Well, what comes next? What's the next thing from a designer's standpoint that we nest into? What do you think? How about the climate zone you're designing in? Because designing in the tropics, the wet tropics, very different than designing in a dry land, very different than designing in wet temperate or cold dry lands, right? So notice it says strategies. What happens is when you tell me what climate zone we're broadly in, that tells me what set of strategies we have to bring to the table. And Mollison, when he wrote the designer's manual, understood that really well, because after he gets through with a lot of stuff talking about laws of physics and biology and ecology in the first couple chapters, right? We have chapters on climate, we have chapters on trees, we have chapters on water and all this other kind of stuff. What do we get to? He talks about climate, and then he gets into actually different chapters that address the strategies for each major climate zone. Okay, so one of the good things to do is if you happen to be designing in, subtropics, if you're down in the southern part, like in southern Florida, where I originally came from, or Jack's in an area where it's usually subtropical except when it freezes, which is an interesting, pattern, right? Right, because he's got two challenges.
With the dry season and the hottest part of the year.
Right. So he's got a subtropical climate pattern, except that he happens to be just far away from the equator, that he also gets freezing events. So you've got to actually come up with additional strategies to deal with the freezing events in addition to the other So that's why we get into that whole thing as strategy. So I have people come in and go, are you going to make me go through dry land strategies? I'm never gonna live in a desert. I don't want to live in a desert. I don't want to have to learn that stuff. And then I'm never going to go live in the tropics, and so forth. And so what do I tell them?
Stop that.
I tell them stop that. Right. The reason is this.
Be less nice.
Yeah.
The reason.
Steal that. Stop.
Yeah.
I know.
Because he said I get to smack him too.
That's right.
Yeah, right.
Just stop it. Stop that. So the reason for that is every site you will design on will have places that are a little drier, and places that are a little wetter, and places that are a little colder, and places a little hotter. When you learn the strategies for all the different climate zones, you learn the why fors. Like, why do I do that? When I get into a place that is hotter, why do I move towards this set of strategies? And what that does is it teaches you how to deal with all the microclimates inside. I don't care where you are. It makes you a much more powerful designer because you learn how to deal with all the microclimates. Okay? Well, what's next? Well, the ecoregion. The ecoregion that you happen to be in is what we pile into next. And this gets into techniques. So I'm sitting here listening to Nicole talk about sheep, and I'm like, oh, we are in the southeastern United States. Hot and humid, which means parasites, right? And I'm like, oh, barber pole worms. Okay. Well, what do we know about barber pole worms?
If you don't eat them, you don't get them.
So exactly right. If you don't eat them, you don't get them. Where do they hang out on plants? Low, down, almost down towards the base. What that means is that if you overgraze your animals, guess what? They're going to get barber pole worms. Okay, the 60-day thing, perfect. Barber pole worm. If you keep the animals off for 60 days, that helps break that cycle. Those are what? Techniques, right? Yes, those
strategies.
Yes.
Very hard to get people's attention.
That's right. Those we're into techniques. Now we get into watersheds. We get into an individual watershed. What I'm looking at is how do we pattern community, right? So I'm really thinking at community level at that point in time. To me, if we had any good sense, we would have followed the recommendations of taking all of the, remember who was the gentleman who suggested all of the state lines along the watershed boundaries? Remember what his name was? Yeah, back in the early days when they were looking at how to divide up the United States into the states, there was somebody who went out, did the whole thing, came back to the government and said, here you go. Here are all the recommended state boundaries, and they go along major watershed boundaries.
Everybody would have water access.
Everybody would have water access. And if you messed up your own watershed, well, it's your watershed, right? Right? And it would have, think about how much like trouble that would have solved. Like, right, instead of like, yeah, we divided the watersheds in weird ways, and now we fight over who gets water rights, and it's like, yeah. Right. But when we get into a certain level of watershed, now we're down inside of ecoregions, we're down into watersheds. Now we're looking at I'm thinking about how do I pattern community inside of that, right? So I'll leave that there because that's a big one. And then the last thing we look at is now we're designing sites inside of the watersheds, okay? And so now we're doing site design. Now, most of permaculture has been designed around site design instead of watershed level design and so forth, right? But I wanted you to think about that because what you'll literally see when I do that, this is my regenerative scales of permanence. What you're going to see is this outermost block here, this cosmos, right, has things like the Milankovitch cycles and stuff like that, right? I'm sure you think about that when you design, right? Believe it or not, I kind of do. And then you get into Gaia, right? And we have some interesting stuff. We've got the diurnal cycle, which is the 24-hour day. We got the moon cycle, right? We've got the ENSO cycle, Pacific Decadal Oscillation. We've got global technosphere. The zeitgeist. What is the zeitgeist?
A conspiracy film.
It's like the collective conscious idea.
It's the spirit of the age, right? It's like this is the zeitgeist is the socio-political milieu in which we're operating, right? So then inside of that we have climate zones, then ecoregions, excuse me, then watersheds and communities, and then sites. Okay, and so we're coming in. Everything in green is biosphere. This is the biology of the place, right? Everything in the brownish color is the technosphere. This is the technological infrastructure that we have. That could include roads, could include power, communication, so on and so forth. On a site, we have site access and infrastructure, don't we? So if you have, solar panels, power, anything on so forth, a swim spa, that's all that's so forth. Buildings and structures, technological subsystems, and then technological furnishings. Those are things like the laptop as a piece of what we would call technological furnishing inside the building, right? So from this, we actually have a scale of permanence that's nested all the way from the fact that we're designing in the cosmos all the way down to looking at, the laptop we have inside of that we're using to present things with, okay? So I use this with the professionals. Normally when I'm doing a professional design course, we go over and talk about every single one of these bubbles, okay? If you want to know what they are, in addition, to this, which you can come and look at it later so you can actually see it. Here are the definitions of all the bubbles, okay? Right, so you can do this. If you're really geeky and you want to come look at it, you can come look at that.
Question, would
Yes.
you be willing to let me share with them a PDF of that?
Sure.
If you have one? Yeah.
Yep.
We'll follow up
Yeah.
after.
Okay,
Thank you.
so, all right. So the first thing, let's get practical now, okay? We kind of got our theoretical underpinnings. Okay, the first thing we do when we start looking at a new site is we look up the weather and climate data. So, WeatherSpark is a good place to start. There's a lot of other sites you can go according to where you are. But in North America, WeatherSpark is one of the places we start. Okay, so you go to weatherspark.com, and I downloaded some data for Cookeville because that was the closest town that they had in their database, okay, to where we are right now. And so I was like, okay, what are we looking for, right? Well, how about that? Okay, so what's really fun is that you can go to WeatherSpark, you can look up a town, if you can do it on your phone right now if you want to, and go look up your location wherever you happen to be, right? And you'll find it'll automatically generate a lot of graphs like this. And it has a button that you can use to download a JPEG. When we do professional site reports, and people pay big bucks for these, you better believe we go and we pull down all of the weather data. And so now anybody can do that. So what do you think my value add is? Interpretation and analysis. So what happens is we give them a bunch of these things and pull it down, and then underneath every one is a couple paragraphs of me explaining the implications of that, right? What does this mean for you? What are the challenges and what are the possible benefits, right? And so this happens to be average high and low temperature from January to December.
I could probably tell you how that really adjusts for here versus there too.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
'Cause
But
it's up on the plateau.
Yes. Yeah. But what it does is it gives us our ballparks and it lets us start seeing what areas we're in, you know, what are our average high and low temperatures. And yes, you'll learn how to quickly start going, oh, we're down in that valley or up on that plateau. We're going to adjust that a little bit, but it gives you the overall patterning that you want to look at, okay? How about average hourly temperature? Okay. So what we're looking at here is time of day and then month. And then we can tell cold is really freezing is, in the blues, and then we get into greens. By the time we get up into reds, we're super hot. And so this basically shows us the time of day. When are we most concerned about heat? When are we most concerned about freezing, and so on and so forth. And so when are we getting super hot here? Well, not surprisingly, in the afternoons in July and August, right? Yeah, not surprising. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So so those aren't too exciting because we probably could guess those. How about humidity comfort levels? Okay.
Miserable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Exactly. So what we have here is we've got a chart that basically tells us what is the probability on any given day of that level of humidity, right? So if we are in July, this is the probabilities, right? So we've got something like a 10% chance of miserable level of humidity in July here, okay? And yep, look at that. We're fairly dry in the wintertime. Again, probably not too surprising to us, right? But it quantifies, what's interesting is it helps us quantify when the shoulders come in, right? Oh, look at that. Okay, coming into April, into May, we start to really shoulder up.
Yeah.
Okay, so when I really need to start looking at that, we have
That's
a
why
miserable.
this event is now.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
And
Right.
not next week.
Right. Yeah. How about this? Average monthly precipitation. This one's critical. Okay. Usually, the first thing I'll ask it two ways because most people will know. Well, people who've done any gardening will usually know. If I say, "What's your average annual precipitation?" They'll be able to say, like where I am, my site's between 55 and 60 inches a year right now. Okay, that's average. But in order to know how to design, you have to know the month, right? Because that's going to tell you an awful lot. And the other thing I want to know, and it's not on these charts, but I want to go look it up, is what is my average? What is my extreme window of no rain?
Yes.
Okay, I want to know what do I need to, and I actually then design for a bigger window than that. So here's the thing. You notice I haven't really mentioned anthropogenic climate change, that kind of stuff. Okay, because it's an incredibly controversial topic according to who you go and where you want to go. What we do know is this. I can talk to a lot of fourth generation farmers and things have changed, right? What I can tell you is that because of the dynamics of our climate right now, we have more energy being held in the system than before. And as a result of that, the climate dynamics are more dynamic. And so what I tell all my designers is this: look at this historic data and now basically say, I will design assuming the following. The extremes are more extreme-y, and the rate of change and slew between them is both more extreme, faster, and slower. What I mean by that is the wets will get wetter and the dries will get drier. The colds are getting colder and the hots are getting hotter. Okay, the length of time it can skew back and forth is both shorter and in some cases longer. We can get stuck in a place for a longer time than we used to, and we can then also. I remember, was it last year, Sunday afternoon, at my house? It was 74 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, by 3:45 the next morning, it was 7 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay, so
That's
yeah.
how you kill rosemary.
Yes. Okay.
And a lot of them.
Or saltwater.
Yeah, and then a couple hours later, it was down to 4 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, so we had gone 70 degrees Fahrenheit in something like 18 hours. Okay, so today we have to assume that those are the kinds of events you're going to have when you're doing a design. Okay, assume that when I say the wet will get wetter, look at North Carolina. By the way, here's the numbers. One of the sites I went and looked at with Billy Bond was right there on the French Broad River. We were talking to somebody who understood the hydrology of place. He said, normally at this moment right now, base flow on the French Broad right here is 30,000 cubic feet per second. So the 100-year flood level is around 60,000 cubic feet per second. So when we had the 500-year flood back 100 years ago, they looked at it and they calculated it was probably right around 120,000 cubic feet per second. During the Helene event, that same spot, they estimate from looking at it today that the actual flow at peak was somewhere between 205 and 215,000 cubic feet per second. Okay, so from a normal base flow of 30,000 to a peak event of 200 and possibly 10,000 cubic feet per second. Part of the reason this is happening is we're basically degrading our watersheds, okay, and we are causing the super high flux from the same rain event. If you had it 100 years ago, would not have created the same amount of rain flux down water because we've degraded the watersheds, right? So by the way, I will be in Asheville on May 31st through June the 2nd. We'll be teaching an advanced watershed regeneration course for 3 days. Cool. So we'll be teaching them how to actually regenerate their watersheds. Okay, so let's keep on going. All right, daily chance of precipitation. What's your likelihood any given day that we are going to have precip? Okay, I better speed up. Okay, average monthly snowfall. These are all things you can get right off of average wind speed. Okay, wind direction. What's interesting is that it claims it's highly variable. I mean, you see that like the different colors tell you which directions, what the likelihood is of it coming from different directions. Yeah, exactly.
Whatever you make.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. And then here's cloud cover. So these are all things that I'm going to go through and I'm going to analyze. Hours of daylight and twilight.
Is this all from that site you gave us?
All from, yep, one site. I go and click, and every one of these things is all just done for you. Okay. Solar elevation and azimuth. Average daily incident shortwave solar energy in kilowatt hours per square meter. Okay. This was all one search. And then, of course, I'll go do others to fill in other things I need. Okay. So that's what I'm going to do first. I'm going to grab that. It's going to tell me what I want to know about any particular site. So somebody calls me and says, we have a job for you in blah. Okay. This is my first stop, so I know what I'm dealing with from a climate perspective, base climate perspective. The next thing I'm up to is I'm like, I need topo maps. Okay. And so if I'm doing a high-end design, what I'm doing is I've got a civil engineering company working with me. We're finding the LiDAR data, and I'm having them generate the topos for me. Here's the number one problem in landscape architecture and civil engineering in terms of topos. They will work with bloody too low resolution, spatial resolution. So I had a job. I was working with one of the big green civil companies, right? It was about 20 square miles. And I looked at the broad topo, and I called them back and I said, I need you to generate me new topos. I need 2-foot contours. And they were like, blink, 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 right? They were like, you want 2-foot contours on 20 square miles? I'm like, yes.
The computer's going.
Yes. Okay, they did it.
Wow.
Right?
You're
The
so
thing-
nice. You get
the
to
thing-
look at things.
Right. The thing is that as soon as
Yeah.
they had originally given me 2-meter data, right?
Okay.
It's like, I can't see any bloody thing from that. Okay. What we were able to do was I was able to identify over 100 sites of hydrological interest and mark them on the map. And then we basically generated an Avenza map, and we spent 4 days in 4-wheel drive vehicles going across the landscape so I could go see and gathering hydrological data. And we actually ground truthed all the models that we were running from that. Okay. That's the sort of stuff you need. So what you need to do is figure out what resolution of a vertical resolution you need on your topo. And it has a lot to do with what's the elevation change across that. If you're in Texas and it's pretty flat, that's when you need resolution down at like the foot.
Yeah.
I've actually asked for 6-inch before because the site was very, very flat. Okay, and you're like, oh, we got 1 meter data. I'm like, you can't tell a bloody thing from that, right? I mean, you got one contour line on the entire bloody site,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Okay, because across the entire site, maybe there's like 1.5 feet of difference,
Now,
right?
do they do that with the data they already had, or do they have to reshoot that?
In some cases, they have to pull. They can pull it from satellite LiDAR. There's been some cases where we've had to have it reshot. For example, right after the Lahaina fires. Okay, that changed the landscape.
Yeah.
So there was a drone flight we had that one of the locals did. They did a drone flight over the whole thing, and they pulled a DSM, digital surface model, with less, 2 millimeter accuracy across the entire landscape of Lahaina.
That's awesome.
And then they pulled out of that, they could pull out topo maps as high resolution as we needed. And then all of a sudden, let us see where the water was going now that the fires had finished. Right? Yeah.
You're seeing the dog pilot.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yep. So that's kind of how we're doing that, right? And so that's really important. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to do this for you. Let me see. Where is it? All right. So why did it go no signal?
You fell asleep.
Did it fall asleep?
No.
No.
Unplug it, go back into the electric.
Have you tried turning it on and turning it back off?
Oh, I think it just did something. Let's see here.
It might need a second before it sees it again.
Yep.
You want it off on? That is plugged in.
Yeah.
I'm gonna off on.
Okay.
Don't know why.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the kind of, so when I do a design usually what we'll do is I have some folks that will do the GIS packages for me because it's like nobody's going to pay my consulting fee for me to do the GIS work. So it gives a really great livelihood to people who have the GIS side. So this is a GIS package. Okay, this is a GIS package we did for a particular location that
Honey Badger Farm?
Honey Badger. That's right. You know Honey Badger. Yep. This is
actually that one.
it is.
Oh, nice.
It is. Yeah, that's why I'm allowed to use it
Okay.
to show it off. Okay.
I want to go take a class.
Okay, let me see if I can get down here and
I was telling him where it was.
yeah, it's Massachusetts.
Oh, is that, okay, that's not
Yeah.
where that
So
was.
that's Chris Martin.
That's
Yeah,
Christmas.
yeah, yeah.
There's an actual Honey Badger Farm in Texas.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
No, I know where that is.
Yeah. So what we're doing here is we are coming in, and these are, so we will shoot all the LiDAR and then we'll do it. This is the stream channel and drainage basins. So what we've done is we've done the topo, this is the topo down here, right? And what we'll do then is we can calculate the stream basin networks and the sub basins. So what we've done is we've numbered all the sub basins. So all these different colored areas, this is an area where that part of the land drains to a common drainage point. Okay, and then these are not actual streams. What they are is they are what we call a stream channel network. What we've done is we've looked at the shape of the land, and when enough water from a surface flow would have come together to form a rivulet during a rain event, you've got a little tiny thin line. They come together, and the thicker the line is, the more the model has calculated water will come together and there'll be a larger flow. So these will be transient flows. A lot of these little things are transient flows. So this shows you, if you can imagine, in a big rain event, like a little boom, like pop-up like we had this morning, how the water is coming down and collecting down the landscape, right? Okay, so we can calculate all of that really easily from this kind of data. And that's why I need the level of resolution, because the higher the resolution, the more of this I can get down. We can get really accurate stream basins and, sub watersheds and so forth. So this is the sort of stuff that we're looking at. And you can take a site like this. This is a 380 some acre site. Okay. And, a package like this, Chase did this package, it's talking a couple $1,000s to do this. Now, if you're going to be doing serious development on a piece of land and you know how to interpret this stuff, very worth it. It's cheap, right? So you've also got like, this is sorry, this is a very big file because you can go in really fine on it. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, right. So you can get this level of detail on the site. Okay. We also have aspect ratios. We'll show you which parts of the site are facing north, south, east, and west. It'd take me too long to go through all these different. This has all kinds. It has a slope index on it. So immediately you can look and see what's my flat land, where's my moderately tilted land, and where's my really intensely. So immediately you can just start looking and go, oh, there's a bench right there I could do something with. Okay, that's too steep. We can set those threshold levels. So you can say, hey, my equipment that I happen to have, I don't want to go over 6 degree slope. We can set your threshold there, right? Okay, different color if it's more than 6 degrees. And so you can immediately see, here's the boundaries where I can safely run that equipment, right? Up in here, don't run that equipment. Too steep, too likely to tip over, okay? Yeah.
Here's the section we're going to leave all the trees where they are.
Right, exactly, yeah. And then like the red sections are like where it's super steep. It's like, yep, that's just leave that. So so all these kind of things, once we have the topo data, we can actually run these reports really quickly, and we can give you super fine resolution. And what's really interesting is there's also hillshade versions of this. Like I said, it'd take me like an hour and a half to go through all this with you. The hillshade stuff with the LiDAR is what they're using to find like the buried stuff in the Amazon.
Oh, yeah.
Because you can see with the hillshade, you can see things like, oh, there's an old road, right? Or there's an old fence line. And you can actually go out and so forth. And we can turn these maps into Avenza maps. And the Avenza maps are basically what you use Avenza on your phone, and it's like Google Maps, except that it has our map on it, and you can walk across your landscape, and you can go to exactly. So that's how we do our site visits now, right? And you can go across, and you can take a picture, and you can geotag it right on your map, and you can take notes, and we can do a whole survey walking and going across a huge site and gather all this data. And I'll bring along like a geohydrologist with me, and I'll bring along an ecological site survey person, and all this. We're gathering all this data. It all goes into their individual Avenza maps. We bring it back and consolidate it. Now I have this Avenza map that has all this annotated data on it, right? So it has all this kind of map with this level of detail, with now all those things on it. And now we go back in and start looking at what's the biome that we're in and everything else. Yes.
I'm not sure how to say it. In Hawaii, you got all these islands with
Yep.
mountains on them.
Yes.
And you got the dry side and the wet side.
Yes.
Does the water here take account for the fact, say you're on a mountainside in Appalachia, how much water is going to be?
So you can do calculations for that. All this is showing you is when it does rain, where is it going to go?
Okay.
There's another calculation called topographic wetness, which basically says which areas tend to accumulate water and which tends to drain. Okay, so there's a topographic wetness. In order to get actual to take in the precipitation profiles and so forth, there's more sophisticated tools we use. Okay, I don't have time to get into it right now. That's like a multi-day class. We get into like how to calculate all that sort of stuff. Okay.
Is there anything at this high level that shows something like infiltration capacity?
No, that is
You have
when
to
we
do
start
that
we start getting into like the heck models.
Okay.
Yeah, that's part of what we were like when we were doing all the stuff for the big sites. We were calibrating the heck models like heck HMS and so forth using river gauge data and some other ground truth data, right? And so we would look at it and we would be able to see like, oh, okay, we modeled it. We thought here's the infiltration, and we had to tweak it, and they came back to me and said, hey, this model is off. Why do you think so? Well, after the site survey, I'm going to tell you that these numbers are not what you think. They're going to be a little different, and try this number. And they were like, ooh, that's much closer, right? So I was able to, like, having done the ground survey, I was able to, and we took soil samples, we brought them back into microscopy. We understood what the soil organic matter profile was, and therefore the water retention capability. I was like, oh, no, you've got this kind of soil organic matter over here, and it's causing this kind of water retention in the soil. Therefore, the base flow contribution. This is all the stuff we get into with watershed regen. Okay. Yes.
Way to output that to like a 3D printing.
3D printing. I'm sure there is. I have to think about it for just a little bit. Yeah. Yeah.
That would be
Yeah.
so cool to be able to do.
Okay, I will tell you this. Okay, I see. I'm already at over an hour and a half. You realize? We started at 10.
15.
Oh, well, we have what, 12:15?
Yeah.
Okay,
You can
good.
go 5 to 8 minutes over because we started late.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so what I did not bring with me, because it's a royal pain to move, is our augmented reality sandbox.
Oh, those are awesome.
Okay. Now here's the thing: we set up the augmented reality sandbox, and there's a way of taking the topo map, and what it does is you flatten out all the sand in the sandbox, and you project it. And what it does is where the sand is too high, it's blue, and where the sand is not high enough, it's red. And so you start moving the sand around, and what you can do is you can recreate in 3D the model, right? So you're basically you're recreating it in the sandbox, and now you can start raining on it. And you can start watching the water go everywhere. You're like, what would happen if we kind of changed this? And you can just try to change it. Where's the water go? Right? Yeah, that sort of stuff. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I'm geeky like that. A friend of mine and I actually built an augmented reality sandbox. So I have one in my house.
Well, here we need one that actually has a gantry on it, so it can pick the sand up and move it itself.
Yeah, that if you can help me program that, that would be great.
It's easier to 3D print it.
It would be easy to
Easier to 3D
Yeah.
print it can do
It'd be
that.
worth doing experiment with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I just want to keep it for
this big.
Yeah.
You can't print it.
I expect
So-
the prototype here by next year.
I want
Okay, so let me do this. Let me come over this way. And since I got a couple minutes, let me do this. This is your aspect. What we're seeing here is this is showing you what's flat, what's pointed to the north, what's pointed to the south, and so forth. So immediately you can see what your solar aspect is, right? So you can just glance at it and see, right. You can see, and okay, you're like, oh, okay, well, that entire slope is like north facing. In eastern deciduous forests, what do we know about north facing slopes? They're colder. They're actually good timber growing slopes.
Pawpaws do well there.
They do, yeah. So you're immediately starting to find all these little ecological niches just by being able to look and see what that is, right? What else can we calculate? Well, let's see here. Let's go on down. Like I said, this is a huge bloody file. This is like an 80 meg file, PDF file, because it's got so much information on it. Okay.
It looks like the base of those is hillside LiDAR.
Yep. So this is the topographic wetness index. What this is showing you as soon as it finishes refreshing is it's showing you where the water will tend to congregate and where it will tend to drain. The red areas are places from which the water will tend to drain very quickly, and the blue areas are the areas at which water will tend to congregate. This is based upon topography. It calculates topographic wetness based upon that.
How does it differ from the map you showed us before where we're showing aggregated totals of flow?
So the aggregated totals of flow is what's called, it's where it goes. It's called the stream channel network. Okay. This is actually showing you areas where, like, you can just glance at it real quickly and say, oh, that's a very dry area. Okay.
It's done going.
Right. Yeah. Right. So topographic wetness index is what it's called. Okay. And so these are all basically, how do we calculate all of it? So repeat after me. Here's our rule. Water runs downhill.
At a 90-degree angle.
At right angle to contour.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right angle to contour. Very good. You can tell she's taking my PDC. Yeah, right. Water flows downhill at a 90-degree angle to contour. So wherever you go on a topo map and somebody goes, right there, where's the water go? Go to the topo line, right? Okay. And then draw a 90-degree downhill from that topo line. That's where the water goes at that one point. Okay. Literally what the software is doing is it's doing that calculation to calculate the stream channel networks and then also the topographic wetness. It's just that simple. It's just a lot of bloody calculating.
I've tried explaining that to students before.
Yeah.
These would be invaluable tools just to say the computer's done all the math.
Yes.
This is what it looks like.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
By the way, to piggyback on
Yes.
what he was saying, I just
Yep.
found a website called Touch Terrain. And I just made an STL file for my backyard.
Ah, nice.
3D printed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Terrain.
Nice.
So I was just playing around with it. So
Fun.
yeah, you can do it.
By the way, for the GIS side, there are two major GIS platforms out there. One of them is ArcGIS by Esri. That is the expensive professional platform that's used by all the big civil engineering companies and all that. If you go do any of the GIS stuff in college, they're probably going to teach you on ArcGIS from Esri. It's dang nice and dang expensive. The dang nice part of it is it comes with a lot of data set access. If you know that you can get all these data sets to import in, and that's nice. The freebie version, which is also actually really, it's nice. QGIS. Okay, you can download all that for free, and you can run it on Mac. You can run it on Windows. You can run it on Linux. Okay, and all of this particular stuff was calculated on QGIS. Okay, this whole package was done, so you can do all this completely free open source software. Okay, and that happened to be that this was freely available LiDAR. I don't have to even pay for it. So the only thing it took was some know-how and some time, and the rest of it was free. Okay, so that gives you that. Okay, so any thoughts or questions on getting the topo data? That's my super quick version of that.
So this report's a game changer.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, and you'll see stuff. We've had people take these things and be like spot stuff on their land that they had no idea was there. And they're like literally going out with their Avenza map and finding places and go, oh my God, I didn't even realize this was here, right? Because of things like the hillshade and showing them that there were old roads and everything else that had come through, or that there was an old a pond site, for example, we've been able to spot like failed pond sites and everything else. Yes.
That's what I was about to say. Is in my little valley,
Mm-hmm.
maybe 400 acres or so.
Yep.
I used the hillside LiDAR, and I found like 35 ponds.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like old timer ponds that have been put up in the hillside that nobody ever knew
Yeah,
about.
we've got a bunch of those.
Yep. Old logging roads, you'll find those.
Yeah,
After-
home sites.
Yeah.
After walking that land, it's very interesting to see this.
Yes. That's why you need both, right?
Yeah.
You need to get out there on the land and walk it yourself. And then this, like when you put the two together, and I've had situations where like I'll get to look at a report like this, and then I'll get some satellite data, and then I'll go on site to do a site survey, and I have marked certain places. And the engineers that are with me, like we go straight to this place, and I'm stopped, and I was like, And they're like, how did you know this was here? Right?
Mhm.
And I'm like,
It's on my map.
it's on my map, right? Yeah. The other interesting little side story I have to tell you is I have had situations before where a architecture firm, I won't name names or locations to protect the guilty, an architecture firm had done a major site plan for a 4,000 acre site. And the whole site plan had roads, it had like buildings, it had the whole 9 yards, right? I don't know how much they charged for it, but normally a site plan of that type would probably be $250,000. With all, it's like 200-page report with all the drawings and everything else, blah blah, and they had done all this stuff. And the owner, the developer, wanted a large pond, more of a lake, as an ecological feature. And so there was a question to me from the designers that was the civil engineers about how do we make this into an ecological pond, right? Because they're used to making a hole in the ground with water in it, not an ecological feature. Okay. And if you, by the way, if you ask a civil engineering company to make you a pond, they will not make you an ecological structure. They will not. Okay. So I started looking at the whole thing, and they sent me all the data and looking at, and I called them back about an hour later, and I said, your topo maps are wrong. Right. And they were like, how do you know that? You haven't been on the site. I say, you told me that there had been no heavy equipment on this site for 50 years. Okay. The only way you would actually get some of the structures in the shape that they're in right now would be for heavy equipment to come in and do it. Because after 50 years of weathering in that environment, it's not going to be like that. Okay. So some of this is wrong. And number two is you've given me, they did this entire thing with 2 meter data. It was 2 meters resolution, right? And I'm like, I have no idea of how they thought they were going to do this design with topo map of 2 meter resolution, right? I guess what they're thinking is that whatever sins they committed, they will just fix with bulldozers, right? And so we started. I said, and so the lake we were looking at was about 110 acres. Okay, so about 110 acre lake we were looking at putting in. And so I was helping them to understand how to do that and where to put the dam, how to do all of that and so forth, and then make it ecological. And I said, why did you not pull new LiDAR data when you did this whole thing? Well, the developer didn't want to pay for the new LiDAR data. I said, tell them we have to have the new LiDAR data because this map is hiding a lot of stuff, and there's data in it, there's artifacts. I can tell it's artifacting, right? I can look at this and say, this is data artifacting. This is not real topography. This is data artifacting, right? And so they said, well, what resolution you need? I said, on this side, I want 1 foot contours because of the relative flatness of it. And so they were like, 1 foot contours? Like, yep, I need 1 foot contours. So they went off and they did it, and they came back. And I got it back, and I'm like, oh my God. It's like, there's all these things in this plan from the architecture company. It's like, you got buildings floating in air. You've got, I mean, like, stuff like this. It's like, yeeks. And this, the roads are in the wrong place and so forth. And so literally I had to get on the call with the engineering company and spend about 3 hours fixing everything and so forth. I mean, it's so, fortunately I was able to like show them how to do it, and I saved them like $500,000 in the process. So because of helping them understand how to engineer things. So that's the sort of stuff that happens. And it's why the topo data is so bloody important, that it be accurate if you're doing that kind of design, especially if you're a professional architecture firm and you're designing a 4,000 acre, community development. So anyway, that's the topo stuff. Okay. So what do we want to go next? The other thing that I would say when you just start getting into your design is you want to pull information on your reference biomes. Okay. So let's look at that real fast. Oh, I do want to show you this other one real fast. So there's another fun thing. And I had this topo because this is another site I worked on, because this one is is one done by Ben Mizimer at Pearl River Eco Design. Okay, so he did these for us and so forth. This is the same thing. You're seeing topo with the stream channel network and so forth. And one of the things we were able to do from this was actually identify the locations in the landscape quite quickly where potential additional pond sites could go, right? And what you're doing, how many of you can read a topo real well? Okay, it's a skill worth developing. Okay, the whole thing is I'm able to look at this and be able to tell you like where ponds and lakes could go really fast. And we want to go out and look at that spot to make certain that what we're seeing on the topo is real, right? But so we're looking at it, you can start looking at and seeing these valleys. You can see places where there is a choke point, right? There's a choke point. And that's not the ideal point, but there's just one I'm spotting. There's a choke point right here, and there's a relatively flat area back up in here. And that's not one of the best, but that's just one I spot right off the top of my head. And if I could go in and start analyzing that more carefully, I could start seeing whether that spot would be a place I could put a small dam wall and hold a lot of water back, right? And put in a sizable pond as a water impoundment in the landscape. So that's another thing that you learn to do pretty quickly. It's the reason that we do the the topographic data before we start doing the hydrological design, because it's an important piece of info. So I know how to do the hydrological design. So we're doing that. We get the climate data, we get our topographic data. Then we also get reference biome information, and then we go into the design of hydrology, right? That's kind of what we're doing. Okay, questions on that before I go? Yes.
When you say you're getting like asking for 1 and 2 foot
Yes.
topo
Yes.
lines,
Yeah.
how are you getting that? Like how does that come about?
So usually today there's two quick and dirty ways of getting data. Okay, that are I should put this, that are easy to do today. One is LiDAR, which is laser image. The other is photogrammetry. Okay, so who knows about photogrammetry? Okay, so LiDAR, you can either do it from a satellite, or you can have a drone or a fixed wing aircraft fly over and do a LiDAR scan. What it's basically doing is it's taking a laser and it's doing this. Okay, and the advantage of the LiDAR is that it can go through foliage and it can find the ground. And so it gets all these data points. So you can find the top of the tree, it can find the middle of the tree, it can find the bottom of the tree, right? So it can create what's called a DSM, a digital surface model. The digital surface model, when you're using LiDAR, can actually show you the surface of the ground. So it can see through the trees and show you the surface of the ground. That's really important when you're doing this kind of analysis. So we're always using this kind of analysis. This is a forested landscape, okay? And as a result, we can see the surface and we can tell what the water is going to do when it hits the surface. So we're seeing through the trees. Photogrammetry has the advantage that I can do it with a fairly cheap drone, but it can't see through the trees. So when do I use photogrammetry? When there are no trees. When will there be no trees? In a desert. But I'll tell you what, in this area where there is when we're doing site work. So I'm going to do LiDAR for the big site. But if I'm now going in, we're building buildings or whatever, and I need a real quick update. Did all the site work get done properly? Are all the pads in the right place? Are they all the right elevations and that kind of stuff? Now, instead of having to go back and hire a very expensive LiDAR setup to come back and I can take a $2,000 drone, fly it over the small area where the buildings are going. We can run some photogrammetry on it, and we can get a really precise picture of what just changed. And if I need to do it again next week, I can do that, and it's cheap. Okay, because You know, if I'm getting LiDAR data from somewhere, I can't pick up the phone and say, hey, you know, why don't you go fly that satellite over and get me new LiDAR data from this week? That'd be really convenient, right? Doesn't work that way, right? Or I got to, I mean, you know how much, so even today, the next generation inexpensive LiDAR drones are about a $60,000 drone package. Okay. So they're starting to come out and it's starting to become more accessible to get somebody to come out and fly a LiDAR drone for you. But the previous generation was $250,000. Like the LiDAR setup that I wanted was $250,000. And so I have to have somebody come out with a $250,000 piece of equipment to do LiDAR on a piece of property. That's not cheap. Right.
Fly it. Do you know what elevation they fly at?
So typically we're running somewhere around 350 to 400 feet AGL, because if you're higher than, you get special clearances with a drone to go above 400 feet AGL, right? Yeah. So, yeah. Everybody know what that means?
Counties have done LiDAR scans that are
Yes.
available,
Yeah.
I
So what
think
you're
a lot
starting
of
to-
properties it's available.
Right. A lot of states and counties are doing this, and they're making the data freely available, which is where we gather a
Watch
lot of
your
it.
property lines, because mine are completely wrong.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't exactly know
Yeah.
how I would
hmm
get it right.
So anyway, that's yeah.
Does your flats have markers?
I have to read the survey and walk it. I'm not even 100% sure where my property line is. I just know where Bree is.
That was the
my
first,
neighbors.
that was the first thing I did. When I bought
No, there's been a survey. Yeah, it is. I just have to read it and walk
And then I verified
I figured.
because I couldn't get to it when I first moved in.
Okay. How about this? So this is called a level 3 and level 4 ecoregions of the coterminous United States. This is where they have gone through and they have categorized all of the level 4 ecoregions. Okay, each one of these has been named, and here's the really interesting thing. If you can figure out what ecoregion your property is inside of, there will be things you can look up online that will tell you about the natural history of that landscape. It will start to tell you what were the tree species, what were the bird species, what were the mammal species, and all that sort of stuff. It'll start to give you all of that. This is how we start figuring out what wants to grow here, right? Yes.
When you say what were the species, we're talking 50 years ago, 5,000 years ago, 5 billion years ago?
So typically these are, this is the Victorian Zoo. Now that's Gordon White's term for it, right? The Victorian Zoo, he says, is the idea that all animals and plants belong where they were when an Englishman first gave it a Latin name. Okay, the Royal Society sent out all the Englishmen to go, you know, look at all the plants and animals and give them a Latin binomial name, right? And they said, oh, well, I see you are here, therefore you belong here. And then write that down, right? You don't belong anywhere else, okay? Because this is where I found you, right? And then they pretended as if nature behaved that way, that nature didn't move, right? That special boundaries didn't move over time, which was crazy. But that's the Victorian Zoo idea, right? Okay, well, you aren't where you were supposed to be because an Englishman said you're supposed to be here, right? And so anyway, but this is typically in the last century, okay? So before, what they're trying to do is go back and look at before major developmental disturbance and so forth. So what you want to do, and like you can act, this is another big file. You can come in here and you can look, but this is the whole United States. Why don't we do this? Let's do.
I just got that thing, but I couldn't do what he's doing.
All right. So this one's hard to read, but this is actually a version of the map that zooms in on Tennessee, since this is where we are. And it starts to show you the different ecoregions, and then it gives you a little bit of a description. And yes, you can zoom in on this. This is another PDF file. And you're going to see, like, for example, over to our west is an area that's like the lower or the inner Nashville Basin, and then you come out to the outer Nashville Basin, and you kind of get up to the plateau. And so there's all these different, and it tells you what the special mixes are, okay? You're on the transition, right? So then what you can do is, once you've gone in and zoomed in, like I won't spend the time to do it. We could zoom in and figure out right where we are on the transition between these. Now what you can go do is that a lot of local universities, especially land-grant universities, have gone in and done a lot of research on these ecoregions. And so now you can go in and you can get data like this. Okay, this one happens to be one of the ones from a Massachusetts site we were working on. Okay, it was well-drained till uplands. Okay, and it starts to give you all of the data about that, and it will give you the relationships to other microbiomes, and then here's the ecological site concept. Okay, it starts to explain it to you, what it consists of, what soil types are probably there, and so forth, what kind of slopes it's typically on, and so forth, associated sites. But then as we kind of get down into it, it will start to tell us different kinds of landscape features. But when we get down far enough, there's a lot of stuff. In a lot of them, as you get down into it, it'll start to actually give you special mix lists, the species that happen to be there and the ecological systems that happen to be there, right? So you can find this. So this is another bit of that upfront data gathering to be ready to design your site, okay? So I kind of wanted to get you on this session was that idea of how do we gather all this data that we need in order to begin a professional level design. And so we will do this for any site of any scale that has an important design aspect to it. We'll get our topo data, we'll get our climate data, and we'll get our ecological thing. And if we're doing a larger site, we might even find and identify sub-biomes inside of it, and we'll create a report that has all of those in it. Like here's a palustrin site, and here's a lowland forest ecosystem. Here's an upland Oakland hickory forest, and we'll actually create and put GIS layers in, so we can create maps and show you where all the reference ecologies are. And that helps us with our design of everything all the way up to like city level design. Yes?
Are you still using QGIS to put those layers on?
Yeah. Yeah. So there's sometimes to go use ARC. We'll use ARC anytime that I'm having to work with large civil engineering companies, because that's what they use, right? If we're doing it as a permaculture design, then we'll typically just use QGIS, because the nice thing is all that output, I can give it to the client and say, here you go, right? And you can download all the software to work with this in the future for free, and you can give it to any other permaculture designer using QGIS, and they can, so all those assets are not stranded in a pay-per-play platform, right? So we'll do homestead design. I don't do homestead design anymore. I have my students do that. I do larger, more professional design these days. But yeah, for the homestead design, we'll use QGIS because it's open source, and therefore you don't get stuck in that whole thing of, well, I don't want to pay that much this year for an Esri license for ArcGIS. Therefore, my data is hard to get at. You can import Esri ArcGIS data into QGIS, and most of the time it works. But there's extra special sauce that sometimes doesn't. So yeah, if we're just doing it for people for homesteads, I recommend using QGIS.
So it's about time.
Yes. All right. Last questions, and we'll wrap it up for lunch.
I was just going to ask: is there any other climate data that you can think of that WeatherSpark doesn't provide that we should have on a homestead type basis?
Okay. So here's what I'll say. I brought this along. This is my permaculture design certification course notes. These are my personal notes I teach from. When I teach a course, an extra copy of this goes on the table so that if you need to go look through it, you can. I'm going to leave this for right now, right here. So please do not move it. It stays right here. But if you want to come look anything up, so you can come into climate and climate factors, and you will find a list here of all the things we recommend that you get for a site. You can come into the climate part and look at that. And there's a bunch of other information in here you might figure, okay? So you can also kind of see a little bit of what I actually teach in a PDC. This is the plus, of course, about 2,000 slides. Right, yes.
So what's your holler hosted PDC class going to be so I can?
Ooh.
Right?
I've already suggested that should be a possibility. 'Cause I wanted to see the classroom.
Yep.
Especially since it's the TV.
Yeah. So basically, I do this about 50 times for that course. But we also have all the design stuff, and yeah, it's a lot.
Well, we
We
does
agree.
one every year.
Yeah, I told him this year I just couldn't have bandwidth. There's just too much. We're looking at next year actually doing the next generation of the PDC, which will be labeled the Regenerative Design Foundations course, and it's not going to be a PDC. It's going to be my version of a Regenerative Design Foundations course with professional credentialing associated. We're looking at piloting that next year in possibly Costa Rica. So if anybody needs to go to Costa Rica for 2 weeks next year, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, and in case this okay. Does anybody get like the after Christmas seasonal thing? So seasonal affective disorder. I'm working right now because I've got a team I'm working with in Hawaii, doing all the bioremediation of Lahaina and so forth. And so I've been wanting to pilot a class, 15-day class called Foundations of Ecosystem Regeneration. It's not a PDC. It's literally regenerating wildlands. Okay. So we are in the final stages of negotiating us running that course in Hawaii, starting on December the 27th. Okay. So the idea was, and we're going to be doing it for 2 weeks. So the idea was we have some college students that are like, well, you go home and spend like Christmas at home with the family and then jump on a plane to Hawaii on December the 26th. And you show up and we start in the afternoon on December the 27th. And we spend 15 days learning ecosystem regeneration on the big island of Hawaii. And hands-on stuff and all of it, including biochar and compost and all that sort of stuff. Because it turns out, by the way, that producing biochar and producing compost is a critical component to bioremediation in addition to agricultural lands. Yeah. Yeah. So we end up. Yeah. So yeah, when we went to North Carolina and we started talking, there's a bunch of people over there that really know how to do biochar, know how to do compost, so forth. They're all like, well, we don't know what we can do about all this toxic gick. We're just farmers. All we know how to do is make compost and aerated compost tea and biochar. I'm like, oh, wow.
You know everything.
You know, literally I knew everything except like how to tweak it slightly, right? Right, how to like tweak it for that application. So it's like, oh my God, we've got the whole team. They're ready to go, right? So yeah, I went there. I did a workshop with them, and like 2 days later, they were doing stuff on the ground, right?
They just needed a coach.
Exactly, that's all they needed. And so I'm still kind of coaching, and that's where that Watershed Regen course coming up is coming because the Watershed Alliance over there is doing that. Yes.
Who is it that you're teaching that to? Is it people with the Department of Making You Sad? Is it like farmers, local people? Who's
So
taking it?
what we're doing is we've been moving more and more over to the side of where all the languaging around what we're doing with the Institute is professional, right? So all of a sudden we've got groups, large professional groups that are extremely interested and they are wanting to partner with us. Okay. I don't want to announce too much, but I'm having discussions with a bunch of them. And there are even government agencies now that are starting to look at and so forth, because what we're doing is I've got PhDs on our advisory board, and we're talking about PhDs in, you name it. I got biologists and, agroecologists and the whole blah, 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 right? So what we're doing is we're coming out with something that we can have all these like heavyweight academians come in and go, yep, what they're doing, it's spot on, right? What's fun is they want to come to the class.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Well, it's about time.
Yeah.
Where on that modified scale of permanence?
Yes.
Have you ever thought about putting regulations on there?
It's on there.
Oh, I didn't see it.
Yeah, it's on there. Yeah, it's actually.
Oh, it's on that one.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, because that should be pretty high up.
So, yeah.
Local
so forth, and you'll find. Let's see, where do we put it?
I'll just take a picture.
Yeah. It's in there.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yep. So it's in there.
Okay, guys, it's time for lunch.
Yep.
So thank you.
Yep. Yep. It's actually in the blue
Yeah.
because it's a anthrosphere thing. It has to do with the people,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, local, state, federal laws and regulations.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, right there.
Because always done a much more simplified version of Yeoman's, and it's just up there. It's like
Yep.
made under climate and topography.